Atihe Māori ora, tui te whakapono, tui te tumanako, tui te aroha, tui te hunga ora, ki te hunga ora, tihe Māori ora, ka nui te mihi ki koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Izzy, for the introduction. I used to work closely with Sir Rob, and it's great to see you've got his passion and drive to make the world a better place. Well done. Thank you to Tāne's Tree Trust and Pure Advantage for the opportunity to deliver the opening address at this conference where native trees and diverse forests are the focus. It's an honour to be here today sharing the stage with some of our country's leading thinkers and experts on climate change and Indigenous forestry. As Minister for Forestry and as an advocate for our native forests, for all our forests, it's fantastic to see people from all over New Zealand come together to talk about the importance of weaving more native forests back into our working lands. And I suppose my true appreciation for native forestry started when I worked for a chap called Dr. Jerry McSweeney on the West Coast at his Lake Meraki Wilderness Lodge. Jerry was a man who used to run Forest and Bird, lived in Wellington and put his money where his mouth was, bought a small rundown block of freehold land in the South Westland park down there and believed that he could make more money from ecotourism than you could from logging. And he's actually proven that to be true. He's a true pioneer in ecotourism, but also in the way we do things and the way we should be doing things. And I also worked in Japan in forestry after I completed my Mastery of Forestry Science. And so I have a good appreciation for the value of wood across cultures. 1,000 years ago, more than 80% of New Zealand was forested. And as Peter mentioned, not Sir Peter, preemptive, as Peter mentioned, clearing of forests started when Maori settlers landed and accelerated when Europeans arrived. The deforestation was done to clear routes for transport, build factories, cities and create export industries we have in the primary sector today. The New Zealand government recognised this was unsustainable and in the early 1900s brought in protections and established plantation forests at scale. As well as being the guardians of our country's ecological diversity, native forests are a great long-term solution to carbon emissions, and we cannot overstate the importance of our native forests. We cannot opt out of climate change, and so we cannot opt out of climate action. We need to mitigate the impact of climate change on our natural environment if we want to ensure a thriving, productive and secure future for our country. Equally, climate change will have consequences for our economic security as well. Left unchecked, it will have a significant negative impact on New Zealanders' living standards and the vulnerability of our economy in coming decades, and not just in terms of products, but our all-important and very powerful brand New Zealand as well. There is no time to waste, and forestry and afforestation have a very important role to play. The critical role of forestry was recognised in Budget 2022, with more than $385 million set aside to support forestry initiatives, and this includes specific investment to help establish native forests. Increasing demand for native afforestation is challenging. It costs more to establish native trees than exotic ones, and this is why the government is exploring options to address these challenges, to improve our knowledge and technologies and support the growing and planting of native trees. Specifically, we have allocated about $145 million to reduce the cost of growing native tree seedlings and increase the number available for planting. As part of the Forest Service work to examine measures to build supply and reduce costs, we are also looking at ways to support research and science, build strong partnerships with iwi Māori landowners and create a national strategy to facilitate the increase in demand in plantings and build a better understanding of the native nursery sector. Earlier this month, the government opened public consultation on how forests are managed through the National Environmental Standards for Plantation Forestry, or known as the NESPF. This is about giving councils the ability to determine what tree is planted where and to ensure that new forests are planted for the right reasons in the right place and managed in the right way. It is very important we get this right. The policy changes we make in forestry now will have implications for many generations. The government is also committed to enabling permanent exotic forests to transition to native over time. And as much further work is needed to be done to determine the best way to achieve this, and as a consequence we have established a group of technical forestry experts, some I know who are here today, who will help redesign the settings of the ETS permanent forest category so it better supports long-term Indigenous carbon sinks, as well as the aspirations of our landowners. Planting trees is no replacement for reducing gross emissions. Even so, the NESPF and the emissions trading scheme will still have to work together to make sure the settings are right for restoring and replanting native forests. Supporting the government's long-term goal of enabling permanent exotic forestry to transition to natives, I'm also pleased to announce a new project in partnership with Tāne's Tree Trust to support research to increase our knowledge and science around the transition from exotics to natives. Through its Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures Fund, the Ministry of Primary Industries is co-investing to develop better science and information around transitional forestry that will be invaluable to landowners who want to see a native forest in the long term. Forbes Ecology Limited and Natural Solutions will have a significant involvement in the project, and I know they are interested in seeing exotic plantation forest owners across New Zealand participate in this research. Researchers will be examining exotic plantations throughout New Zealand to build up a clear picture of the drivers that will make a transition to natives more likely and understand any roadblocks. This research will support and inform the broader government work to enable permanent exotic forests to transition to natives. I also believe it's vital that we start to educate the youth of today on the importance and value of trees. It's why I've reinvigorated Arbor Day since becoming Forestry Minister. I mean, we all, those of my age, over 40, over 50, we knew about Arbor Day. You probably didn't, Izzy, but we all knew about Arbor Day, and I've got a couple of fantastic young private secretaries. Francis, my forestry private secretary here, is much younger than me. Asked them who knew about Arbor Day. No one did. So Arbor Day was big in my time. We've reintroduced Arbor Day, and I asked the Forest Service to do this when I first became Ministry, if they could do it the following year. They did it that year. It's really important that young people, young students are brought up understanding the value around native forestry in general, but certainly native forestry. And it includes every single primary school has been given seedlings as well as educational material for students to help them understand the important role that forests have to play. Now, one of my visions for New Zealand, as I've said many times, is to see 1 million hectares of land reverted to native forests over the next 100 years. And no one I have spoken to disagrees with this ambition. It's just how we get there is what we're working on at the moment. At a global level, there are truly massive challenges to saving our forests and competition for land and resources. Last year, there were about 9 million hectares of forestry burnt, and there was about 9 million hectares of forestry illegally logged. It's about the same size as our total forest estate. However, here in New Zealand, we have the opportunity to reach our targets through developing accords and financial packages which encourage and enable people to plant, revert or conserve native forestry. Tree planting, especially with native trees, is a proven method to slow down the effects of climate change and improve biodiversity outcomes. The trees we plant and the actions we take now will influence our future. I want to thank the great work of Tāne's Tree Trust and Pure Advantage for bringing people together to continue the conversation on native forest regeneration and management and share ideas on how to integrate native forests back into our landscape. As has been said in many languages by many cultures over the millennia, look after the forest and in turn it will look after you. Ngā mihi nui.
Thank you, Minister. Great to have you here and to have some time for questions. I'm going to start with a curly one while I've got you on the stage. So originally, you only had natives in your permanent forest category. What changed that?
Look, it's a very good question. And I stand by that ambition. As mentioned, I don't think that land use change has kept up with the economics of the primary sector. Pre-1980s, when farming was subsidised, you got paid for clearing anything and everything. Since subsidies have been withdrawn, there's a whole lot of land now that is uneconomic, and the Forest Service has identified about 1.25 million hectares that is only suitable for permanent forestry. And by that I mean it's not close to a mill or a port. You would never cut it down for ecological or conservation reasons, let alone health and safety reasons. You never get a person with a chainsaw on these sorts of hillsides. So it is only really suitable for permanent forestry. There's about another 1.25 million hectares that's very marginal from an economic perspective in terms of arable farming, which is probably suitable for production forestry. But I do believe on that 1.25 million hectares, we do need Indigenous forestry. As mentioned, I have a vision of 1 million hectares of native forest where there is none at this point in time. It's just how we get there. And When James and I went through this consultation, James Saw and I went through this consultation, we listened to all the voices who said there needs to be another way through this. And at the moment, there is just not an economic model that will allow us to plant up that land in native forestry from scratch going forward. So what we're doing is we're looking at a transition model. As mentioned, we've set up this group, and I see TK's here at the moment, a really important contributor to this. But what we need to be able to do is have a financial incentive to allow these hillsides, this land to be planted, but then a model that allows a successful transition from exotic to Indigenous. And it's why we've set up this expert group that will look at various models. So let me start by saying no one wants to see lock up and leave radiata. That is just not an option. The permanent forest category will remain open on the 1st of January, will open, I should say, on the 1st of January next year. We're thinking, and there's still a lot of work to do, that probably by the 1st of January 2025, and I don't want to preempt the work of the expert group, if you have a forest in the permanent forest category, it will have to have a management plan signed off probably by the Forest Service and a management regime put in place that will successfully allow that transition from exotic to Indigenous. So to answer your question, the reason we did this is because the feedback we got is the best way to achieve the ambition was actually to have that transitional model from an economic, from an aspirational, from a land use and a financial perspective. This was the way to get there.
And again, I don't want to hold you to any dates because you've got an audience and a camera crew, but you said 2025. So is that what you're kind of hoping for that transition model?
That's my aspiration.
Yeah.
So the permanent forest category opens 1st of January this year, so you can do whatever you want. However, if a forest is to remain in the permanent forest category, and it may be, it's an aspirational target, but I firmly believe we can get there. But my thinking at this point in time is if a forest wants to remain in the permanent forest category on the 1st of January 2025, then it has got to have a forestry management plan that shows how you're going to transition from exotic into natives.
Cool. You also mentioned incentives. So are you suggesting, or do you think that landowners should be provided government incentives to establish and manage native trees?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we're working with the Forest Service on this. Let me start by saying I have a very strong vision for the role of the Forest Service in the ongoing development of forests across our country. And it is one where we work with post-settlement iwi groups, where we work with councils, where we work with landowners, not in a profit motive, but in order to allow them to optimise the best use of their land. So let me give you an example. One of my officials has told me that 80% of Maori-owned land in Northland is sub-optimised. Now, the role of the Forest Service could play in this, and I see Jason, who's head of the Forest Service here, looking at me going, okay, what the hell is he going to say? But my view is what the Forest Service does is it works in partnership, because we don't have to make a profit, but in partnership with these groups to say, hey, what do you want to achieve with this land and how can we help you get there? We're not going to tax you, we're not going to take your carbon credits, we're not going to require you to do anything, but what we will help you do is optimise that land in partnership, so eventually you're the masters of your own destiny. So I think the Forest Service has a very clear role to play. In terms of direct subsidies, they exist already. But what I would like our model to end up transitioning to is it's not, here's a check, go away and make it happen. It's how can we work with you in partnership to add significant value to your land and your forest estate, and most importantly, your vision for getting to where you want to be.
Cool. So if we've got any landowners in the audience that might want to sort of jump on that, I'm going to pass your phone number out later today in terms of how they can get access to that. Or instead of that, how would you recommend that they do that?
Well, look, Jason, have we announced where we're going to open the offices? We have. Oh, that's good. So
you can tell us.
I can tell. So we're opening an office in Northland. So what we are. My vision for the Forest Service is, I know Peter, you started your life in the Forest Service, and a number of the old dogs who worked in forestry did. That's a term of endearment. But the Forest Service trained everyone from forest rangers all the way through to Oxford PhDs and everything in between, and it allowed people to be the best they possibly could be in order to follow their forestry vision and their career path. And that's my vision for the Forest Service now. So I'd like to have Forest Service people and officers in all places around this country where we have forestry, native or exotic. So look, the first thing I would do, because we're at this conference, is email my office, stuart.nash@parliament.govt.nz. It'll go to Frances, who is my incredibly capable and highly competent forestry private secretary, and she will pass them on to the Forest Service or me.
Cool.
But ordinarily what I see happening is that people will go to the Forest Service office, we'll have outreach services, and Forest Service staff will be like they were pre-1980s, and we'll be all over the country letting people know how to do things in a way that, as mentioned, allows them to optimise their vision and ambitions.
I love that.
It's very cool.
It's really cool. One of the other things I'm really interested in talking to you about is that you mentioned in your speech that government's exploring and investing in technologies to make natives more viable. And I know that technology is playing a big role in lots of our climate needs, but it also can feel a bit risky to be, waiting for technologies to help us. But are you seeing technologies that are giving you hope?
So let me be a little bit contentious here. Have we got media? I suspect we're live streaming, right?
Yeah.
We've just released for consultation the Ewaka Kanoa, farm plans for carbon emissions. There were two things that we basically disagreed on between the Ewaka Kanoa primary sector group and what the government has put forward. And one of them is the partnership wanted to see every bit of vegetation on a farm go to offset the emissions on the farm. Yeah. And philosophically, we agree with that.
Yeah.
Practically, it is just really difficult to measure stands of a certain size or trees or shelter belts or riparian planting. But we've invested through the Provincial Growth Fund in a company based down in Nelson that is using innovative proprietary technology that will allow them to actually really accurately determine the carbon sequestration of very small lots of trees in a way we can't do at the moment. So even though we said in Ewaka Kanoa that this is something we won't do, but philosophically we want to do, the reason we said we can't do it is because we haven't got the technology. But we want to do it. So we're working really hard to ensure that when farmers or landowners plant trees, that they are rewarded for that. And so technology will help us do it. That's just one example. But the use of drones and all this sort of stuff will make things a lot more accurate and a lot easier for us to assess, and also a lot easier for people to determine the carbon that their trees are sequestering.
Awesome, that's a great example.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I've got some questions coming through on Slido. We've got one here from Oliver. There is a lot of focus on new forests. What work is government doing to improve the health and carbon storage of our remaining Indigenous forests?
I'm told, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I see Penny's here at the head of DOC. Great to see you, Penny. He's doing a fantastic job. But I'm told that if we got rid of every single possum overnight, well, Rod would probably tell me actually, Rod Carr, head of the Independent Climate Change Commission, if we got rid of every single possum tonight, we would meet our obligations under the Paris Accord. Is that right, Rod? Am I right in saying that? Roundabout. Okay.
The technical term.
That wasn't a no.
It wasn't a no.
But all I'm saying is that these furry things are munching their way through such a level of biomass that it is creating huge, and luckily they don't burp, so they don't emit carbon. Am I right in saying that? But anyway, so, as we know, 1990 is that baseline. But what we're also looking at doing is, and I'm really passionate about this as well, if a farmer or a landowner has put aside, let's say, a stand of forest, and let's say it's covered in under QE2, and they've fenced it and they've got rid of all the pests, there's no reason why that management intervention shouldn't be rewarded through carbon sequestration from that stand of forest, like I said, through a specific management intervention being used to offset that landowner's emissions. So I'm really keen to see how we work to ensure that good management practices in pre-1990 or non-traditional forests are actually rewarded. But getting rid of possums, go out and kill a possum and you'll be doing the world a favour.
You'd also be making my dad super happy if all the possums died overnight. Well, we've maybe got time for one more question. Yeah, if you can keep your answer under a minute. Will the research into transitioning exotic forests to natives take into account regional and sub-regional climate variables?
Yeah, it actually has to.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons one of the areas we're looking at talking about is my neck of the woods, where east coast of the North Island. Beautiful part of the world. But the regional council there has identified about 200,000 hectares of land that should never have been cleared, that should be in forestry or permanent forestry. Actually, they're working closely with the Forest Service and an independent environmental ENGO to see what can be done there. But we know that Mānuka grows at a different rate on the east coast than it grows down south, or Kākatea down south sequesters carbon at a different rate than Kauri up north. So we know a hell of a lot about radiata. We don't know much about our native forests, and that's the work we've got to get right. That's a very specific work program for the Forest Service. It'll take a little bit of time to get there, but you've got to start somewhere in today's... Well, we actually didn't start today, we started yesterday.
Yeah.
But we've got to get this right in order, as mentioned, to provide that financial model for people to be able to sequester carbon and plant indigenous forestry and do not only good for biodiversity and the ecosystem, but also for their back pockets.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Minister Nash.
Thank you
for your time. On time, on budget. Thank Minister Nash for joining us.